What if the person you trust the most is actually someone who has been lying to you all along? Imagine this. A 53-year-old Filipina alone, looking for love, longing for connection. After years of feeling unseen, she takes a leap of faith, booking a one-way flight to meet a 27-year-old man she's never met in person. The promises he made were enough to make her believe in a future they could share. But what she found when she arrived in Jakarta was something beyond her worst nightmare. A twist no one could have predicted. Her name was Maria. And what happened to her in those final moments of trust is something that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, deception, and the dangers that can lurk behind a simple message on a screen. Can you figure out what went wrong? Can you spot the signs that everyone else missed? Stay with me as we piece this together. Step by step. Unraveling a mystery that no one saw coming. This is the story of Maria Gonzalez, and it will leave you questioning how well you know the people you trust with your heart. Maria Gonzalez was no stranger to hard work. At 53, she had spent the majority of her life putting others first. As a dedicated nurse, Maria had spent countless hours in the hospital, caring for the sick, the elderly, and those in need. Her job was more than just a profession. It was a calling, but it also meant long shifts, weekends spent away from her family, and endless nights of exhaustion. And while she gave everything to her patients, Maria often found herself feeling alone, neglected, and unseen. Her personal life had been no easier. At 32, after a painful divorce, Maria was left to raise her two children, Jada and Micah, on her own. The emotional toll of navigating a broken marriage only to face the responsibility of rebuilding her family alone left its marks. There were nights she stayed up late, silently crying, wondering how she would make it through the next day. But she never let it show. Maria never asked for help. She just kept going, pushing forward because there was no other choice. Her world revolved around her children. She cooked their meals, attended every parent-teacher meeting, and worked tirelessly to ensure they had everything they needed. Yet, despite her unwavering dedication to them, Maria felt an undeniable emptiness deep inside. She longed for the companionship she'd lost, for someone to share the weight of the years with. After years of giving to everyone else, Maria had little left for herself except for a deep aching need to feel seen, to feel loved, to feel like someone finally noticed the quiet strength she carried. And so, after all these years of quiet sacrifice, when an unexpected message arrived on her phone promising the connection she had been craving, it was impossible for Maria to resist. She had been alone for so long. And here was someone who said they could see her, really see her. Could this be the answer to everything she'd been waiting for? Before the online world came into her life, Maria was a woman shaped by caution and experience. Her nature was reserved, always careful with her heart after the wounds of her past. She had been burned by relationships before, trust betrayed, promises broken, and those scars ran deep. Her divorce, a painful chapter that left her emotionally drained, had taught her to guard her heart fiercely. She focused on what she could control: her family, her job, and the steady rhythm of daily life. Raising her two children, Jada and Micah, on her own wasn't easy. It demanded every ounce of her energy. Maria worked tirelessly, juggling long shifts at the hospital with the demands of motherhood. She was the one who woke up early to pack lunches, who stayed up late helping with homework, and who kept the household running smoothly. Her children never went without, and the sacrifices she made never seemed to end. Every paycheck was stretched thin. Every Moment dedicated to making sure they felt loved, safe, and supported. Despite the challenges, Maria never complained. She was a woman who quietly carried her burdens, never asking for help, never voicing her own needs. There was no room for her to be anything other than strong. Her focus was always on her children's well-being and their future. Never on herself. She poured all her love and energy into them, believing that by giving everything, she would create a better life for them. But deep down, Maria longed for something more. She longed for a connection, for someone who would see her as more than just a mother, a nurse, a caregiver, someone who would appreciate her for all the love she had to give, for the quiet resilience she carried every day. Yet, after everything she'd been through, Maria had learned to keep her heart locked away. She had been let down too many times to believe that anyone would be willing to truly see her again. But then one evening, as she sat in the quiet of her home after another long shift, something changed. An unexpected message appeared on her phone. The kind of message that promised something different, something real. And for the first time in a long while, Maria allowed herself to hope. After years of isolation, Maria found herself at a crossroads. Her children were growing up, becoming more independent, and the house that once echoed with their laughter now felt strangely quiet. The late-night shifts at the hospital, the endless responsibilities, and the isolation had left her longing for something more, a connection, a companion, someone to share her life with. But Maria wasn't ready to jump back into the dating world with full force. She wasn't looking for anything serious. She just wanted someone to talk to, someone to remind her that she wasn't invisible, that there was still a chance for love. So, after much hesitation, Maria decided to try online dating. She wasn't expecting a fairy tale or a life-changing romance, just a few conversations, maybe even a laugh or two. She joined a Christian dating site, keeping her profile simple and genuine. She talked about her love for cooking, her faith, and her children, but didn't expect anything more than the occasional friendly chat. It was a way to ease the loneliness without putting her heart on the line. And then a message from Rico appeared. Rico was a 27-year-old man from Indonesia, someone Maria never would have considered if she'd been looking for a relationship in the traditional sense. His profile picture showed him smiling under a wide-brimmed hat, standing against a backdrop of turquoise waters. His description was brief but sincere. He talked about his love for adventure, his dreams of starting a life filled with love and laughter, and his desire to connect with someone who could see him for who he truly was. At first, Maria wasn't sure what to make of it. The age gap was large, and the thought of a man from a faraway country seemed daunting, even a bit surreal. But there was something in his message that caught her attention. He greeted her with a simple, "Hello, Maria," followed by a question about her favorite book, then told her how much he admired her strength and independence. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He simply asked about her, taking the time to listen and respond thoughtfully. As the days passed, Rico's messages became more frequent. Each one was respectful, kind, and thoughtful. He complimented her, not just on her looks, but on her resilience, her wisdom, and her capacity to love. He called her queen in the sweetest, most sincere way. And each time he did, Maria felt a warmth inside that had been missing for years. He made her feel seen, truly seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Their conversations deepened as Rico shared stories of his life in Indonesia, his dreams of opening a small business, and his hopes for the future. He listened to Maria talk about her children and her years of hard work, never once making her feel like her life was anything less than remarkable. Every word he typed seemed to carry genuine interest. And slowly, Maria began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't like the other empty conversations she'd had before. The connection was real. Or so it seemed. For the first time in years, Maria felt like someone cared for her in a way that was soft, kind, and patient. She wasn't just a mother or a nurse. She was Maria, someone deserving of love, respect, and care. It was exactly what she had been longing for. Someone who valued her, not for what she could give, but for who she was. And for the first time in a long time, Maria began to believe in the possibility of something beautiful. As the days turned into weeks, Maria found herself drawn deeper into her conversations with Rico. What began as a simple exchange of messages soon evolved into something more. Every day, without fail, Rico would send her a message. Sometimes just a quick hello. Other times, a longer note telling her how much he appreciated her strength. How much he admired the way she built a life for herself and how deeply he felt connected to her. It wasn't the typical small talk. It was thoughtful, meaningful, and it made Maria feel something she hadn't felt in years. Special. Rico's compliments were like a balm to Maria's soul. He called her queen, a word that resonated deeply within her. It wasn't just a nickname. It felt like a title, a recognition of her worth, her resilience. He would tell her she was beautiful. Not just on the outside, but in the way she carried herself, in the way she loved and cared for those around her. For the first time in a long while, Maria wasn't just seen as a mother, a nurse, or a provider. She was seen as a woman whole, deserving, and worthy of admiration. With each message, Rico peeled back more of his own life. He told her about his dreams of opening a small business, of traveling the world, and of finding someone who would walk beside him as a partner in all of it. He painted a picture of a future together, a life filled with love, laughter, and companionship. These weren't just casual words. They felt sincere, as if Rico genuinely wanted to build something real with her. He didn't rush, didn't demand anything. Instead, he listened. Really. Listened to her hopes, her fears, her desires. Every night before bed, Maria would check her phone for his message. They'd send each other good night texts. Sometimes long and heartfelt. Other times just as simple, sweet dreams, my queen. Rico had a way of making Maria feel cherished, of making her believe that someone for the first time truly cared about her, about the real her, not just the parts that were expected or necessary. He made her feel beautiful inside and out. And Maria couldn't help but smile, reading his words with a warmth that she hadn't felt in years. Rico's messages were full of poetry. Little notes about how he admired her calm, her strength, her kindness. He'd sent her quotes about love, about life, about destiny. One night, he sent her a poem he'd written for her, telling her that in the chaos of the world, she was his calm, his anchor, and his inspiration. You are the sun after the rain, the quiet in the storm, he wrote. Maria, overwhelmed by the tenderness of it all, couldn't help but feel something stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Real unguarded hope. For the first time in ages, Maria began to believe in the possibility of love again. Not just the kind she had given to her children or her patients, but the kind that was for her. The kind that made her heart race when she saw a message from Rico pop up on her phone. The kind that made her feel seen, valued, and most importantly, loved. And as she closed her eyes at night, it wasn't just the exhaustion of a long day that made her drift off. It was the warmth of knowing that for once someone truly saw her and in his eyes She was enough. As the weeks passed, Maria's connection with Rico grew stronger. What had started as a cautious exchange of words had evolved into a bond Maria never anticipated. Every message, every phone call seemed to confirm that this was real. At least that's what Maria told herself. She began to imagine a future with Rico, one where they would build a life together, far from the quiet loneliness she had known for so long. The thought of seeing him face to face, of feeling his warmth and presence beside her, filled her with excitement. For the first time in years, Maria dared to believe that she could be loved in the way she had always hoped. After months of carefully planning and saving, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She was going to meet Rico in person. She didn't just want to take another step in their relationship. She wanted to see if what they had built online could truly stand the test of reality. The doubts and fears that had been nagging at her were still there, but the longing for connection was too strong. She told herself that she had done her research, that she wasn't walking into this blindly. She had convinced herself that this was the opportunity to find happiness, the happiness she had worked so hard for and the kind she thought she deserved. Maria began preparing for the trip in earnest. She sold personal belongings, things she had accumulated over the years, but no longer needed, and used the money to help fund the journey. She booked a one-way flight to Jakarta, something she hadn't even thought twice about. She didn't buy a return ticket. This wasn't just a visit, she thought. This was the beginning of something new. But the truth was, Maria was gambling more than she realized. She closed her savings account, the one she had kept as a safety net for emergencies, and used the money to withdraw a lump sum, $8,400, that she believed would be enough to get her through the trip and maybe even help Rico with his business. Her heart raced with excitement, but there was an undertone of anxiety that she couldn't shake. Her family, especially her children, voiced their concerns. Jada, her daughter, was the first to question Maria's decision, asking her to reconsider, to think about the risks. But Maria reassured her, telling her that she had prayed about it and that this was the right thing to do. She told them she would be fine, that she was just taking a break, seeing the world, and experiencing something new. But deep down, Maria knew that she was doing more than just traveling. She was opening her heart to the possibility of a future with someone who had made her feel valued, loved, and seen. Even as her children gave her worried glances and her best friend Cheryl expressed doubts, Maria stayed firm in her decision. This was something she needed to do for herself. On the morning of January 4th, Maria stood before her bedroom mirror. Taking one last look at the woman she had become, a woman who had spent her life giving to others, but was now taking a leap for her own happiness. She packed her suitcase carefully, folding clothes and tucking them neatly into the compartments. Her Bible, a constant companion through every hardship, was placed at the top, the worn pages, a testament to the years of prayers and quiet strength. She called Cheryl, her best friend, before heading to the airport. "Pray for me," Maria said softly, knowing that Cheryl's voice would be a steady comfort even from afar. Cheryl's response was laced with concern, but she understood. "I'll be on my knees until you call me from there," Cheryl said, her voice tinged with both worry and love. As Maria drove herself to the airport, the world outside was still dark, the streets quiet and empty. She took one last deep breath as she parked her car, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. For a woman who had always played it safe, this was the first time she was stepping into the unknown without hesitation. With her passport in hand, she checked in, passed through security, and sat at her gate, sipping her tea, her mind swirling with excitement and doubt. The plane was calling, and with each passing minute, her anticipation grew. It was a journey. Toward hope, toward love, and yet there was an unsettling feeling that wouldn't go away. Was this the beginning of something beautiful, or was she about to make a mistake that could change her life forever? At 9:10 a.m., as the plane began its ascent into the sky, Maria's heart beat faster. She glanced at the screen on the back of the seat in front of her, watching the map as the plane made its way toward Jakarta. For Maria, this was more than just a trip. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one she hoped would be filled with love, adventure, and a future she could build with Rico. But as the plane climbed higher, the audience couldn't help but wonder. Is she making a huge mistake? As Maria made preparations for her trip, the voices of concern grew louder. Her children, Jada and Micah, were the first to voice their worries. Jada, her 2-year-old daughter, was particularly apprehensive. She had seen her mother go through so much over the years. And now, as Maria prepared to board a plane to a foreign country to meet a man she'd never met in person, Jada couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Jada asked, the concern evident in her voice. "I mean, really sure." She sat down next to her mother at the kitchen table, her gaze fixed on Maria. What if he's not who he says he is? What if he's pretending to be someone else? What if this is all just a scam? Maria smiled gently, trying to ease her daughter's fears. "Jada, I've done my research. I've talked to him every day for months. He's real. I know him." But even as she said the words, a small part of her wondered if she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Micah, her 6-year-old son, stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He'd been quieter than Jada, but Maria could feel the weight of his unspoken worries. "Mom, you don't know this guy. You've never even met him face to face," he said, his voice quieter than usual, but still firm. "What if something happens to you out there? What if he's not who you think he is?" Maria could hear the anxiety in her son's voice, the same fear that had been building in her own heart, but she didn't want to admit it to them or to herself. She didn't want them to see how nervous she really was. Instead, she reassured them, masking the doubt with a smile. "I'll be fine. I've prayed about this. I'm doing this for myself and I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Maria said, her words laced with conviction. She wanted them to see her confidence, her strength. But deep down the worry gnawed at her. She had always been the rock for them. Strong, dependable, unshakable. But now, as she prepared to step into the unknown, she realized how much she was depending on this trip to fill the void that had lingered inside her for so long. Jada wasn't convinced. "I get that you're excited, Mom, but you've been hurt before, and I don't want you to get hurt again." "I'm scared for you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "You're my mom. I don't want anything to happen to you." Micah nodded, his usual tough exterior softening. "I'm just saying. Be careful, please." The concern in their eyes was too much for Maria to ignore, but she couldn't back out now. She had made her decision. This was her chance to finally feel seen, to feel loved in a way that went beyond the roles of mother and caregiver. This time it could be different. "I promise I'll be careful," Maria said, her voice steady, but with a hint of uncertainty. She knew they didn't fully understand, but she needed them to trust her. She needed them to see that this was something she had to do, something that was about more than just a man on the other side of the world. As the day of her departure drew closer, the doubts continued to linger. In the back of her mind, but she pushed them away. She had made her choice, and she wasn't about to let fear or uncertainty take it away from her. She reassured her children once more, kissed them goodbye, and boarded the plane. Leaving behind their worried faces and the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were right. But as the plane took off and the city below grew smaller, Maria's heart beat with a mix of excitement and fear, hope for what might lie ahead and a quiet, lingering fear that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The long flight from Houston to Jakarta had drained Maria, leaving her with heavy eyes and a body sore from the cramped quarters of the plane. But as the plane touched down on the tarmac, a spark of excitement reignited deep inside her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she would finally meet the man who had captured her heart. Through the glow of a screen. After months of messages, video calls, and shared dreams, Maria was about to meet Rico in person. As she stepped off the plane and into the bustling airport, her eyes scanned the crowd. And then there he was, Rico, standing just beyond the customs area holding a simple cardboard sign with Maria written in bold letters. His smile was wide and sincere, his eyes shining with warmth as he waved at her. Maria's heart skipped a beat. He looked even better than his pictures, more vibrant, more alive, his presence more magnetic than she had imagined. He stepped forward and greeted her in person, his voice smooth and confident, the kind of voice that made her feel instantly at ease. "Welcome, Maria," he said, his tone full of affection and charm. He didn't hesitate, reaching out to take her suitcase from her hand. His touch gentle yet assured. "I've been waiting for this moment. I'm so glad you're here." Maria's heart swelled. He's more handsome than his pictures, she thought. And for a fleeting moment, everything felt perfect. She was finally here with him. Rico's warmth was undeniable. He spoke to her like she was the most important person in the room, as if the distance and time had never existed between them. He talked about the future they would build together, about the life they would create. His words filled Maria with hope and excitement, erasing the doubts that had crept into her mind during the long flight. This was it. She had finally found someone who saw her, who cared about her, someone who made her feel valued and loved. But as they made their way out of the airport and into the bustling streets of Jakarta, Maria began to notice something strange. Rico didn't take her to a polished hotel or to any of the well-known areas of the city she had expected. Instead, he led her to a small car and with a casual smile, mentioned they would be heading to a guest house. Maria, too tired to question him in the moment, simply nodded. The car ride was long, and as they drove farther and farther away from the city center, Maria's excitement began to shift into uncertainty. The landscape outside the window grew less familiar, more remote. The streets became narrower, less lit, and the buildings less modern. She tried to shake the unease that was slowly creeping into her chest, telling herself it was just the exhaustion from the flight, but a small voice in the back of her mind wondered, why not a hotel? Why this place so far from the heart of the city? Rico, noticing her silence, spoke up with an easy charm. "This guest house is special. It's peaceful here, private. No distractions. I thought we could start our time together here, just the two of us. It'll be nice. I promise." But even as he spoke, Maria couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. The guest house wasn't what she had expected. The area around it seemed quiet and isolated, and the exterior of the building was far from welcoming. The paint was chipped, and the narrow alley leading up to the door was dimly lit. The lobby was basic, the air thick with humidity, and the clerk barely looked up as they checked in. Rico paid in cash. No formal check-in, no identification required. His behavior was so casual, as though he had done this many times before, and Maria's discomfort grew. What is he hiding? The question lingered in her mind, but she pushed it aside. Maybe she was just overthinking things. She had come this far, and she didn't want to let doubt ruin this moment. Still, as they walked down the dark hallway toward their room, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sense of unease was growing, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Rico was still smiling, still talking about their plans, but Maria's mind kept returning to the distance they had driven, the quietness of the guest house, and the lack of transparency in everything around her. The room they entered was small, the decor simple and worn. The bed was neatly made, but the air felt heavy, and the silence seemed almost too thick. Maria sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to brush off the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. But as she looked at Rico, his warm eyes still locked on hers, she told herself that she had come this far she couldn't let the doubts take over. But why did it all feel so off? Back home in Houston, the silence was deafening. At first, Maria's daughter, Jada, tried to brush it off, reasoning that her mother was simply busy exploring Jakarta or taking a much-needed break from the constant hustle of her life. Maria had always been someone who deserved a little time to herself. So Jada told herself there was nothing to worry about. But as the days passed, the silence began to feel heavier. Maria hadn't responded to a single message or call. No good morning texts, no photos of the places she was visiting, no updates on how she was adjusting to her new surroundings. Jada waited, her phone in hand, waiting for the familiar ping of a new message from her mom. But each time it didn't come. The nagging feeling inside her grew, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. By the third day of silence, Jada's worry escalated into dread. She tried calling her mom repeatedly, 3 times, 4 times, 5, but each call went unanswered. Her mother's phone simply rang out. No voicemail, no response. Just a hollow silence on the other end. And with each passing hour, the unanswered calls seemed to stretch further and further into something much darker. Jada's anxiety grew. She sent a message after message asking, "Mom, are you okay? Please call me back." But the blue check mark on WhatsApp, the one that indicated the message had been read, was all she received. No reply, no explanation. By the 5th day, Jada knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her mother. Maria was reliable, always checking in, always keeping her promises. But now, there was nothing. It was out of character, and the pit in Jada's stomach only deepened. She called her brother, Micah. "Something's wrong. Mom's not answering. I haven't heard from her in days." Micah, usually calm and collected, felt the tension in Jada's voice and immediately agreed to help. Together, they began to trace their mom's last known location, calling every hotel and guest house they could find in Jakarta. Jada even called Cheryl, her mother's best friend, asking if she had heard anything. Cheryl too was silent on the other end, her own unease mounting with each passing moment. By that evening, the silence became unbearable. With dread thick in the air, Jada filed a missing persons report with the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, her hands shaking as she spoke to the officer. "She's never gone this long without checking in. It's not like her." The officer promised they'd look into it immediately, but Jada couldn't help but feel helpless. The thought that her mother might be in trouble, possibly even in danger, had never felt so real. As the investigation unfolded, local Police in Jakarta began their search. Officers questioned guest houses, checked local hotels, and searched every corner of the area where Maria had been last seen. They scoured security footage, combed through records, but each lead seemed to lead nowhere. The city was vast, and the trail Maria had left was faint. But then something shifted. A guest house manager who worked at a small, unassuming guest house on the outskirts of Jakarta, made a call that would change everything. He remembered Maria. He recalled her checking in with a younger man, Rico, the man she had traveled across the world to meet. He was able to confirm the details of the check-in, but he hadn't seen them since. The couple had paid in cash with no ID or formal registration. The manager's memory jogged something in the back of the officer's mind, and they asked him to go back to the guest house to look for anything unusual. It wasn't long before the manager called again, his voice shaking. "There's something wrong. The room, it reeks. It's foul. We've been getting complaints from the staff for days, but we didn't know what it was. I think you need to come." The police rushed to the guest house. The air was thick with the smell of something rancid, an odor that hung in the halls, so overpowering that it made their stomachs churn. When they arrived at the door to room 17, the first thing they noticed was the faint trail of dark liquid on the floor leading toward the door. One officer cautiously knocked, announcing themselves. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. They tried calling out, but there was no response. The room remained eerily silent. With no response, they decided to force the door open. When they did, the scene inside was nothing like they expected. The dim light flickered as the door creaked open, revealing a scene that would haunt them forever. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out any daylight. The room was thick with the smell, and as the officers stepped inside, their eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then they saw her. Maria's body lay on the bed, covered with a blanket that had been hastily pulled up over her head. The sight was haunting. Her suitcase sat untouched against the wall, her shoes neatly placed near the door, her phone face down on the side table. The last call logged was from Jada, but there was no sign of Maria answering it. The room wasn't ransacked. Her money, her personal belongings, everything was there. But the marks on her body told a story that was too painful to ignore. It was clear that Maria had been through something far worse than just a missing person. The officer's gaze fell to the dark shadows that spread across the floor. This was no accident. When the police forced open the door to room 17, the heavy oppressive silence of the room hit them first. The foul odor seemed to smother the air, thick and nauseating. It wasn't just the stench of decay. It was something darker, something that told them this was no ordinary crime scene. As the door creaked open, the officers were met with a sight they would never forget. The room was dim. The curtains tightly drawn, as though trying to keep the light from revealing what had happened. There on the bed was Maria, her lifeless body covered hastily with a blanket, the corner of it slightly askew. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a quiet scene, a moment frozen in time. But as they stepped closer, the true horror began to unfold. Maria's body was bruised, her skin marred with deep, dark marks. Her hands, which had once comforted so many as a nurse, bore signs of a violent struggle, defensive wounds. The kind left by someone trying desperately to protect themselves. Her fingers were swollen, the skin torn in places where she had tried to fight back against whatever had been done to her. Her clothes, though disheveled in some places, were neatly folded at the foot of the bed, an eerie reminder of the woman she had been before this nightmare had taken over. There was no sign of forced entry, no chaos or signs of a struggle that would indicate an attack. Out of nowhere. The room was still, almost unnervingly so. The bed was made. The suitcase neatly placed against the wall. Her shoes were lined up by the door, her personal belongings untouched. But it wasn't the orderliness of the room that shocked the officers. It was the brutal violence that had been inflicted on Maria's body. Maria had been attacked brutally. Her once calm, hopeful journey had been shattered by unthinkable violence. The marks on her body were not just physical injuries. They were a testament to the terror she had endured. Her skull showed signs of blunt force trauma, a fractured skull from the impact of something heavy. Her ribs had been broken in multiple places. Internal bleeding spreading across her body. Her hands and forearms bore deep bruising, signs of someone trying to shield themselves from the pain, from the assault, but it had all been too much. What struck the officers most, however, were the signs of sexual violence. There was no mistaking it. Maria had not died quickly. She had suffered. The evidence was clear. She had been violated in ways that went beyond the physical wounds. The brutality of the attack, the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her seemed too much to comprehend. The contrast between the woman Maria had been calm, hopeful, excited for the future, and the reality of the crime before them was staggering. Just days ago, Maria had been texting her daughter about how she was finally with him, Rico, the man she had trusted, the man she had opened her heart to. She had flown across the world seeking love, seeking connection. And now her family was left with the unimaginable truth. Maria had been murdered, her trust betrayed in the most horrific way. It was a crime so brutal that even the seasoned officers who arrived at the scene were visibly shaken. The quiet warmth of Maria's messages, the hope that had led her to Jakarta, seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by the raw violence that had stolen her life. The emotional weight of it all was too much to bear. The woman who had spent her life giving, helping, and caring for others had been reduced to this. A woman who had longed to be loved and cherished had met her end in the most violent, dehumanizing way imaginable. It was a stark, haunting contrast to the hopeful journey she had set out on just days before. As the investigation deepened, the truth behind Rico's charming facade began to unravel. His real name was not Rico, but Diwa Prauso, a man who had carefully crafted a false identity, one that he used to prey on vulnerable women, weaving a web of lies and manipulation that spanned across borders and countries. At first, the police were unsure of the extent of his deception. But as they dug into Dua's past, they discovered a pattern, one that stretched back years. He wasn't just a well-meaning young man in search of love. He was a seasoned scam artist who had used the same tactics to manipulate and exploit women online. He targeted those who, like Maria, were looking for love and connection, often focusing on women who were older, emotionally vulnerable, and lonely. DEA's approach was methodical, almost rehearsed. He would spend months building trust with his victims, carefully choosing his words to make them feel valued and special. He promised them love, respect, and a future together. He gave them attention when they were most vulnerable at their lowest points and slowly chipped away at their defenses. But in reality, he was using them for one thing, financial gain. As the police connected the dots, they found a disturbing history. DEA had been in and out of online relationships with women in various countries, women in the US, the UK, Australia, and even Europe. He would shower them with affection, compliments, and promises, gaining their trust until they were emotionally invested. Then, just when they felt they were falling in love, he would begin to ask for money. He would say his business was struggling or that he had a sudden emergency or that his phone was broken. The request started small, maybe a few hundred for a new phone or some repairs for his so-called business. But over time, the amounts grew larger. Some victims like Maria believed they were helping him fulfill his dreams, investing in a future they imagined together. In reality, he was using their money to fund his own lavish lifestyle and to keep the illusion of a relationship alive. When Diwa was finally apprehended and brought in for questioning, he showed no fear, no guilt, no remorse. The officers were shocked by his cold demeanor, especially as they laid out the horrific details of what he had done to Maria. But Diwa's response was chilling in its casualness. "She gave me everything," he said flatly, leaning back in his chair, showing no emotion. Why would she stop? She knew what this was. She knew what she was giving me. The officers were stunned by the lack of empathy, the complete absence of any remorse. Diwa didn't view Maria or any of his other victims as real people. To him, they were just transactions. He had lured them in, used them, and when they stopped giving, he discarded them. It wasn't about love. It had never been. It was always about control, manipulation, and the money he could extract from them. As the investigation continued, the layers of Dua's deception began to unfold. Victim after victim came forward, some reluctant, others with anger in their voices. They described how Dua had built the same illusion with them, how he had made them feel like they were the only one, how he had promised them a future together. One woman from the U.S. spoke about how Dua had convinced her to wire him $2,000 to help him expand his business. She had believed him just as Maria had. Another woman from Germany had sent him money to cover his rent, only to find out later that he had used it to pay for a trip to Bali, something he had told her he couldn't afford because of his so-called business struggles. One woman even described how Dua had promised to marry her, telling her that he would fly to meet her soon, but he never showed up. Instead, he simply moved on to the next woman, using the same tricks, the same lies, the same manipulation. It wasn't just Maria who had fallen victim to his charm. There were more, many more. And Diwa had gotten away with it time and time again, moving from one victim to the next, always careful to avoid crossing the line too far until the moment he thought he could take everything from her. The chilling truth was now clear. DWA's manipulation went far beyond Maria. He had been running the same con on vulnerable women for years, exploiting their loneliness, their desire for love, their trust. And with each woman, the pattern was the same. Build the connection, gain their trust, ask for money, and then discard them when the money stopped coming in. As investigators pieced together the full extent of his crimes, they realized just how deep his web of deception truly was. But what was most disturbing wasn't just how long he had been getting away with it. It was the cold, calculating way he had treated each victim. To him, they weren't real people. They were just tools to be used, emotions to be manipulated, wallets to be emptied. Maria wasn't the first woman he had deceived, but she was the first who had come to him in person, trusting him fully. And now, as the truth of Da's actions came to light, her family, her friends, and the world would be left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been taken too soon. A life that had been robbed, not just of trust, but of dignity, love, and hope. Maria's death shook not only her family but the entire community. For those who knew her, Maria was more than just a mother, a nurse, or a friend. She was a symbol of quiet strength and resilience. For decades, She had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders without complaint, dedicating her life to the people she loved and the work she cared for. She had raised her children alone after a painful divorce, never once asking for help, never once showing weakness. Her love was constant. Her dedication unyielding. Jada, Maria's daughter, struggled with the loss of her mother in a way that was almost too painful to put into words. As she stood before a room full of mourners at her mother's funeral, her grief was overwhelming. But what hit hardest was the realization that in her mother's final days, Maria had dared to believe in something for herself, something she thought was real. Something that was supposed to bring her happiness, and yet it had cost her everything. Jada stepped up to the pulpit, her voice trembling but steady as she spoke about the woman who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return. "My mom was the strongest person I know," Jada began, her eyes red but fierce. "She fought through so much, raising me and Micah on her own, working long shifts as a nurse, always putting others before herself. But when it came to love, she was so careful. She didn't let herself trust easily until now, until him." Jada paused, trying to steady her breath. The words felt like a weight she could barely carry. She wanted to believe. She wanted to be seen for who she really was. Someone who had given so much, someone who deserved to be loved just as much as she had loved others. She thought maybe this time it would be different. But it wasn't. Her voice broke. What happened to her? It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the trust that was shattered. It was about the hope that was crushed. Jada's words echoed in the hearts of everyone in the room. Maria's search for love, something that had been a quiet, unspoken yearning for so long, had led her to a man who promised her the world and then took her life instead. It was a painful reminder that sometimes the greatest risk is the one we take with our hearts. The funeral was held on a cold Saturday morning, and more than 300 people gathered to honor Maria. The church was packed. Friends, family, co-workers, and patients she had once cared for all came to say goodbye. There were rows of nurses who had worked alongside her for over 2 decades. Families who had felt the compassion and professionalism Maria had brought into their lives, and neighbors who recalled the kindness she showed them during difficult times. Maria had touched so many lives, and now they were here to mourn not just the loss of a woman they had loved, but the tragic end of a story that had begun with so much hope. As the service went on, the room was filled with soft sobs and quiet prayers. Maria was remembered for her warmth, her gentle nature, and the way she always seemed to know when someone needed help, even when they didn't ask. She had been a quiet force, someone who had given, not just with her hands, but with her heart. The contrast between the woman they knew and the brutal way she had died made the pain even sharper. There were no grand eulogies, no grand speeches, just simple heartfelt words from those who loved her. Her story, one of hope, betrayal, and trust, was not defined by the last tragic chapter, but by everything that had come before it. The woman, Maria, had been the woman who had spent her life giving love to others, was far more than just a victim. She was a mother, a friend, a nurse, and a woman who had dared to believe in love once again, even if it led her to the most devastating of outcomes. As the service ended, and the mourners slowly made their way out of the church, there was a deep sense of loss that hung in the air. Maria's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a lesson, one that would stay with everyone who had known her. The question echoed in Jada's mind, the question that would never fully leave her heart. How do you protect someone you love when they're blinded by love? And how do you help someone realize that not all love is worth trusting? Jada had watched her mother's search for connection and the painful journey that had ultimately led to her demise. How do you stop someone from believing when their heart is so full of hope? How do you warn them that love can sometimes wear the mask of manipulation? Maria had been a woman who trusted, who loved unconditionally, and in the end, she had been betrayed in the worst way possible. But there was also a deep quiet gratitude among those who knew her. Maria's life had been one of service, of compassion, of giving, even when she had little to give herself. And though her life had ended tragically, her legacy lived on in the hearts of those she had touched. She had shown them all what it meant to love, what it meant to give, and how precious the act of being truly seen was. In the end, Maria's story was not one of failure, but one of hope. The kind of hope that led her to believe in love again, even after so many years of hardship. It was a painful reminder that sometimes the greatest vulnerability we carry is the willingness to trust someone else with our heart. Jada stood quietly by the grave, the weight of her loss heavy in her chest. How do you protect the ones you love when they can't see the danger? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she knew one thing for sure. Maria's story, her legacy would continue to inspire her and others to be more cautious with their hearts and to always remember the value of true love, trust, and the courage to keep moving forward no matter what. As we reflect on Maria's story, one question lingers in the air. How much trust is too much? How do we protect ourselves from those who prey on our deepest desires, our longing for love, connection, and validation? Maria's tragic fate serves as a painful reminder of the dangers that lie behind the screens we trust so easily. She believed in the possibility of a better life, in the idea that love could still be hers, and it cost her everything. But how do we as individuals navigate this world where people can so easily manipulate our emotions and exploit our vulnerabilities? How do we keep our hearts open without losing ourselves in the process? Maria's death was not just a crime. It was a wake-up call. It's a reminder of the risks involved in trusting someone you've never met, especially in the world of online romance scams and emotional manipulation. The signs are often subtle at first, hidden beneath layers of affection and charm, but the consequences can be devastating. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share. Together, we can raise awareness about online romance scams and emotional manipulation and hopefully prevent something like this from happening to someone else. Have you ever been in a similar situation? Have you or someone you know fallen for an online romance that turned out to be a scam? What steps would you take to protect yourself or someone you love from falling into the same trap? Let us know in the comments below. Your story might help someone who's in need of guidance. And together we can make sure that Maria's story is not in vain. Thank you for watching. Let's stay vigilant, stay aware, and always protect our hearts.